So my parents immigrated from China over here to the US many years ago, now over 3 or 4 decades, and came from a totally different life experience from me. So it's like they will never understand me and will never understand what I'm going through in my own life, because I was born in the US. I had a totally different life than them, and there's only so much you can do to relate to them, because my parents are traditional Chinese parents, especially my mom. She's an Asian tiger mom, and she was super strict, she was super disciplined, and she made sure my brother and I always got good grades in school, and most of the stereotypical things that you hear about Asian Americans, a lot of it is true, but not always. That had an effect on me because my mom wanted me to be success oriented, and success oriented means becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, going after money, looking for career stability and all those things. And I don't know what it was, but I felt like I rebelled. I just didn't want to follow the same script that everyone else was following, and being compared to other kids saying that, hey, you know, oh, Johnny is going to Harvard, or Sally is going to just got a job at the local hospital, now interning for some doctor, right? So there was just all this like hidden pressures I felt like was being pushed upon me at such a young age, and the only thing that I knew how to do at being a teenager and even going to be a young adult was to rebel against it. And I don't know, I guess I didn't really have a traditional childhood growing up. I grew up very poor. We lived in a Latino neighborhood in Queens, New York, where everyone around us was struggling to survive, struggling with many kids, with multiple jobs, working side gigs, and, you know, trying to make ends meet. And growing up in such an environment was definitely shocking in the sense, now that I'm looking back onto it as an adult, but that was the norm for me and my brother and my family when we were growing up. And being one of the few Asians in a predominantly Latino neighborhood was definitely also a factor that sort of shaped how I view the world and our place within it. And it was all about just not being able to fit in. My childhood was spent in schools where I felt like I was the only Asian person there. I was sort of just different. And when you look around you and you see other kids doing these things, and, you know, there's a lot of different cultural aspects as well, and not really understanding who I was, what my roots were, because I was sort of stuck in the middle. I'm not Chinese, but I didn't feel like I was totally American, because the image that is portrayed in the media and the news and movies and arts and cultures, that American is a white person usually. And so that I didn't feel like as if I was represented, and the things that I felt like I was represented in was usually something very stereotypical of Asians. And being a diaspora, being someone that's not really Chinese, someone from their homeland ethnically, because my ethnicity is Chinese and my parents are Chinese and they became citizens, American citizens later on, but also not being fully American. And I don't know if that really gave me some chip on my shoulder, or trying to prove something, to be like, hey, I am an American and I am Chinese American and I have this cultural background that is different from everyone else. But it took me a lot of time to really embrace it. And this sort of goes to wanting my parents' approval. Like I guess like most kids want their parents' approval, whether that's like an attaboy or, you know, attagirl, like you did a good job and I'm proud of you, I love you, blah blah. But for like a Chinese American kid growing up, being the first generation to be actually born in the US, that wasn't really a thing. Like there was no attaboys, good job, like, hey, you know, high five, and, you know, hey, you know, you did good at school, I'm proud of you. There wasn't really any of that. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video and you're getting some value out of it, please
If you can just click the like button and actually subscribe, that would be really, really helpful because it helps the YouTube algorithm actually show my content to more people. As always, thank you for watching.
I don't know. I guess that was like a different form of love, and maybe the form of love from my parents was really like, hey, you know, here's food on the table. We want you to be successful, but they're not going to say it. And I wasn't really sure why that is, and I don't know if that's something that I would particularly want to bring onto my own children if I ever have them. Is to give them that emotional stability and emotional support. So it's hard for me sometimes to relate to my parents, especially my father, who is like very traditionally Chinese. He loves Chinese food. That's all he can eat, and like he doesn't really want to try anything else. And he's very like, in a sense, specifically narrow-minded in that area of how he thinks and how he operates. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like understanding that my parents are a product of their own experiences. They grew up in rural and suburbs of China in the 80s and 90s as a young adult, and they experience you know, the end of the Cultural Revolution and, you know, life under Mao and all those different historical flavors, you know, if you can put it that way. And it's very different. You know, they had a very different upbringing, and when they came to the US, they were in their late 30s because they wanted my brother and I to have a chance to be born in the US before they had us, so that we can potentially be the president of the United States one day, because you have to be a citizen, you have to be born here, right? So there was just all these things that they were contending with and trying to escape in a way to a land with more opportunity and more freedom. And that's very different from my upbringing. You know, like I grew up in a predominantly Latino neighborhood in Queens, New York City, and I grew up relatively poor compared to everyone else around me. And you know, we had to scrape to get by. We, you know, lived on one income, my father's income, and we were trying to figure out everything else. And growing up like that really made you understand the value of a dollar and trying to succeed in whatever way possible, or whatever you call the American dream. And the American dream is to find success and to make money and to experience the best life that you can live. And I guess that's what I try to do every single day, is like I try to win the approval of my parents in one sense or another, because I feel like as a son and as a child of a parents, like you want their approval. Maybe it's this like deep-seated nature, and I'm still trying to work through it in reflection, and being able to talk about these things really helps me, because it gives me a renewed sense of hope that one day, you know, my relationship with my parents is strong and we can relate, even though we have vastly different experiences growing up and being adults and living our own lives. And I always say, like, you shouldn't care what your parents think, in a sense, right? And it's easier said than done, because your parents are a product of their own lived experiences. They grew up a certain way, and they're gonna give you advice, and they're gonna want something specific for you based off of their own experiences. It's like a projection of what they want out of life. And sometimes they try to live vicariously through you. Maybe they didn't have a good childhood growing up, so they really want you to grow up with money and security and a stable job, when maybe you want to do something very creative, and you know, you were born and you live in the US, where there's a land of many opportunities, and maybe a creative passion is in the cards. But to my parents, to Asian parents, like they're like, no, like we want something stable, secure, like being a doctor, lawyer, engineer, etc. And you know, half of my life was spent trying to pursue those things that they sort of wanted for me, but not really something that I deeply wanted for myself. And I've always had very different career pivots in my life. I worked in sales. I got a degree in accounting, wanted to go into business, working on startups, becoming a military officer in the Marine Corps, then becoming a software engineer, and also writing and creating content as I guess a content creator now. But it's so varied and all over the place, and I'm still trying to figure out my own place in the world and my relationship with my parents is a constant struggle in a sense, because I do want to make them proud, and I'm sure all of us do want to make them proud. But it's like, how do I juggle trying to make them proud and winning their approval with something that I truly want, because one day, and it's kind of morbid to say, is that one day they're going to pass away, and you're going to be left with the decisions that you make. I'm going to be left with the decisions that I made 10, 20 years ago, and I have to live with it for the rest of my life, and they won't be here, and I don't know if they're going to be proud of me or they're going to approve of certain things. But I feel like I need to go out and do what I feel is right, and if I make the mistakes, so be it, because we're all human. My parents are just as fallible as I am, and that's kind of figuring that out with age, is that they make plenty of mistakes. They actually don't know a lot of things, and they're in their 70s now, and they're still trying to learn things. And I'm in my 30s, and I'm trying to figure out these things out. And I've only been adulting for a decade, but it takes many years, and it goes down that path. And trying to figure that out is not easy, and is not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.